I'm your host, Lori Rawlings from Lori Rawlings and Associates. And my guest for this two-part series on employee recruiting and retention and beating burnout is Bob Wendover. Bob is the president of Common Sense Enterprises and an award-winning author who has been researching and writing about workforce trends for more than 30 years. Common Sense Enterprises helps employers improve their daily decision-making process, and its work is based on interviews with more than 3,000 corporate leaders, business owners, and government executives. Bob has worked with firms ranging from the Fortune 500 to small companies seeking to improve their bottom line results. Bob, welcome, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Laurie. It's great to be with you.
So, as I mentioned, we're going to be doing a two-part series here because we're focusing on two topics that are really important in today's moment in history. And the first one is recruitment and retention. And then in part two of the series, we'll talk about your new book, Beating Burnout, because that's also an incredibly important topic. So let's dive in on recruitment and retention, which is more important than ever in today's ultra-tight job market. How can employers determine what's working and not working in their recruitment efforts?
Well, I always advise people to take a step back and look at the numbers, tenure. How long are people staying? Why are they leaving? Who's applying? Who's not applying? I find that most employers are very reactive when it comes to this type of thing. Joe or Jack or Sally is leaving. They don't think about the ramifications of that, especially in smaller organizations. And then all of a sudden there's a gap and they rush to complete or fill that gap. But they don't really take time to look at the patterns of why people are leaving and so on. And as a result of that, they're caught off guard. They're in a rush. They don't predict things. And so what I always advise them to do is look at the tenure that they've got. And the easiest way to do that is simply to look at each position, calculate the average tenure. So if you have someone who is working in an installer, we'll just say generically an installer position, how long, and you've got 6 or 7 installers, look at the history of that. How long does the average installer last? And then if you've got 6 installers and the average installer stays 3 years, and all of a sudden you've got 4 out of your 6 who have been past that 4 years, that's probably a signal that you're going to lose a couple of them, and you can predict that pattern. And if you do that for each position, you're not caught as off guard, and you can keep people in the pipeline and know when it's appropriate to recruit and to start attracting new ones.
That is a really great point. One of the things I see is that employers are very reactive on things like this. And I think it's so important for them to be a little more proactive because turnover is really expensive. And that's a theme that we focus on a lot in this series is how to prevent turnover. So I think you make a great point about keeping track of tenure and why it's so important to do that. So, I mean, when you are seeing a lot of turnover, and a shorter tenure than you might like, are there some pieces of advice that you think employers should be thinking about if they're seeing that in terms of expanding their tenure and reducing their turnover?
Well, it's the way you approach it. One of the things, and this has happened to me any number of times, I chatted with a contractor not that long ago, and I asked him, I said, how do you go about hiring someone? And he said, well, I have 2 partners and we look at resumes and then we decide who to interview. And then I interview them for about 45 minutes and my other 2 partners interview them for about 45 minutes. We like what we hear, we make an offer. And I said, okay, that's great. How much do you pay these people? And he said about $85,000. And I said, how long would you like to keep them? And he said, we try to get at least 3 years out of someone. And I said, so if I can summarize that, you're spending 3 45-minute interviews and a resume review, and you're making a $250,000 decision. And there was this just dead silence on the phone. And then he started laughing. And I said, why are you laughing? And he said, well, I just spent 2.5 hours trying to decide which toolbox for my new truck. And so it kind of put that whole thing in perspective. And there's a lot of that out there, unfortunately. So we have to look at the gravity of what we're doing because employees are an expense. Turnover is a huge expense and it impacts the bottom line because if you hadn't spent it on turnover, it'd be going into your pocket. And yet people tend to be, as we talked about, very reactive in that sense. So we have to we have to really get a focus on that type of thing. And the average person just says, "Oh, this is in the way. I can shoehorn interviews in. I can look at the resumes." And these days, the process is so much more sophisticated on the applicant side. You know, you can get online, look at Amazon. You can find hundreds and hundreds of books on how to interview, which means the average person, if they're worth their salt, is well prepared, at least in terms of what they think you're going to ask. And so they come in that way. And so I'm always saying to employers, understand that you want to, hiring people is about observation. It's not about words. And if you can observe them in the environment, if you can watch them work, if you can keep them off balance to some degree, not out of some sort of conniving way, but just simply because you want to see how they react when things don't go the way they're supposed to, you're going to see a lot more than, well, I tell people avoid the yups. Are you a hard worker? Yup. Will you show up on time? Yup. Do you know how to do this? Yup. Well, that's worthless. And yet I see too many employers still doing that.
Yeah, you're so right. You're so dead on and insightful in terms of why it's important to have a thoughtful, strategic recruiting process. Starting from the very beginning, that's where you need to start to make sure that you are retaining employees down the road. And so can you tell us a little bit more about what employers should be doing from the very beginning when they're thinking about recruiting new employees into their organizations?
Well, one of the first things to do is look at culture. The average person who applies to you is going to be qualified. So if you're hiring mechanical engineers, the average person who applies is not going to apply unless they have the technical qualifications. So what you're doing is you're looking for a match. You're looking for a match in terms of work ethic or approach to the work. You're looking for a match in terms of culture. You're looking for a match in terms of basic skills such as communications and the types of things that you would do in terms of problem solving and so on. In a basic sort of way, it starts out with a job description, but it gets so much more than that because the job description will list the tasks. They won't necessarily list the nuances that you want on the job. And whoever you're hiring, you're going to have to depend upon them and you're going to have to live with them. We spend more time with the people we work with than we do with our spouses or significant others. And yet, we don't pay attention to that. So that's really where it starts. And then from there, you go out and say, okay, where would I find those people who would have those types of energies, those types of focuses, and so on, and try to attract those individuals. That's one of the reasons why, referral programs are effective because people tend to refer people they're like. And as a result of that, if your best people are referring people, chances are you're going to get a more focused, better quality, or not better quality necessarily, but a better match in terms of the people who are referred. And so you want to go out to those individuals, make it worth their while. You want to be able to say, look, we want to hire people like you, not exactly like you, but we want people who are going to contribute to the environment, who are going to be a part of the team, who are going to be good problem solvers and create that balance in the culture that we need so that everybody works together to get the job done. And then the messaging has to reflect that. You have to be able to put that in the text. You have to be able to put that in video, in posts, in recruiting messages, in descriptions, any place where the applicant is going to be approached. And you should also go out to people who know those individuals and say, or those types of individuals and say, who do you know? And this is what I'm looking for. And then you watch what happens. You fine tune from there.
Yeah, that's great advice. So, picking up on that, there's obviously a great advantage to using a referral program where you are tapping your existing employees to find more people who are like them. But the flip side of that is that if you have an organization that doesn't have a lot of cultural diversity or a lot of gender diversity, that might not be the end of the story in terms of if you're trying to expand and become a more diverse workplace. Can you share? Can you share some thoughts with us on how employers who are desiring to bring in more women or more people of color to create a more diverse team, how they can go about doing those things?
It begins with a couple of things. It begins with imaging. If I want to hire old white men, then my messaging is going to be old white men oriented. It's going to be pictures of old white men. If I want to hire women, I've got to have more women in the picture, especially in mechanical trades and areas where there are traditionally dominated populations, male-dominated populations. And, I'm continually surprised at some of the literature that I see, some of the posts that I see online about, in fact, I was working with a mechanical contractor not long ago, and I checked their Facebook, and here the Facebook posts are all about, hey, we went hunting, and hey, we went fishing, and, hey, we got together for beers on Sunday to watch the football game. Well, okay, that's great for those guys, but if they want to attract women, then it's going to take one tough woman to try to fit into that type of a situation. So you've got to find ways to change the messaging. And the same thing is true once they walk in the door. Just as an applicant, they've got to be able to look at that. If, there's, Billy Bass on the wall, that sends a different, a different picture or a different message, if you will, than more gender diverse and more race diverse types of images and what you see in the brochures and all of that type of thing. You can't obviously sit down and say, okay, we want to hire this specific type of person. It just, without some sort of official affirmative action, you shouldn't do that. That's wrong too. But you can do it subliminally. You can do it subtly and encourage people. And then also, if you're hiring people, go out to the local colleges, go out to the local universities, and say, hey, who do you know that is the best? I'm not worried about whether or not they're going to fit in that sense. Who's your best qualified person? And it may very well turn out to be a young woman who is looking to get into that industry.
That's great advice. And, one of the other things that I know you focus on is how contractors and apprenticeship programs who are attending job fairs where they're trying to recruit the best and the brightest, how they can put their best foot forward to get the best and the brightest. Can you share any tips with us on how to do that?
Well, it's, job fairs are traditionally something that are not very productive for the average employer. And the reason for it is because human nature says, sit on the chair that they provide in the booth and watch the world go by. Very, to put it bluntly. You've got to get out there, and if you are working the booth, first of all, the person working the booth should be an outgoing individual, should be somebody who's able to reach out into the aisle as people are walking past and engage individuals, as opposed to just stand there like a bump on a log. So you've got to think about who in your organization is going to be the best match for that, not just the individual who's supposed to be in charge of recruiting, for instance, or the individual who can make a hiring decision. You can bring the tough, grizzled supervisor out there and have that person stand there, but why not bring someone in the target market? So I might, bring out, if I'm trying to create diversity, I might bring a young woman out there who doesn't have any hiring authority necessarily, but is a face that they're trying to attract, because faces attract faces. And so as individuals walk past, they say, oh, this might be a place to work because I see people who look like me standing in the booth. So that's part of it. A second part of it is you have to play on human nature. That means, I was going to say beer, but beer doesn't generally work, especially if you're looking at colleges. Well, beer works, but it's not supposed to in those situations. But the idea is beer, food, things that attract people into the booth. That get people going. And we tend to just, put up our stuff. We tend to put up our little, displays and say, hey, come work for us. But we don't give them a reason why. One of the things I suggest, especially with technical organizations, is bring the equipment you use and let them play with it. especially into technical fairs or on-campus recruiting fairs and so on. If these individuals are able to touch the equipment, it makes all the difference in the world because they can play with it and you can engage them and say, what do you like about this? If you use this in a college lab, yes, I have. Okay. What did you like? What did you not like? And you might have somebody who says, well, it's not very intuitive. I didn't like the software in it. I know how to use it, but I think it could be improved. Great. How would you improve it? Well, all of a sudden you're in a conversation that is doing two things. Number one, you're getting that person invested in having a relationship with the organization and talking with a like-minded soul. And you are also getting a chance to see the applicant problem solve and express an opinion and express some knowledge, working knowledge, rather than I passed the course. Well, that's great that you passed the course, but that doesn't necessarily mean you know how to use the equipment, because in most cases, you passed the course and you used it once or twice just to demonstrate you could use it, but that's not using it in the field. So it's those types of nuances that make all the difference in the world in terms of developing the relationships.
You raised a couple of points that I hear over and over again when I'm talking to people from non-traditional construction backgrounds, when I talk to them about why they were interested in the trade and, what obstacles they may have faced. And number one is, I need to see someone who looks like me, or I saw someone who looks like me who's doing the job. And that made me think, oh my gosh, if she can do it, I can do it. Or, if he can do it, I can do it. So that's really important to have representation of different people from different backgrounds if that's what your goal is in recruiting. So I think that's an excellent point.
As an example, women in construction and different related organizations like that, why not go out and make presentations to those? Now, does it have to be a woman who goes out and makes a presentation to a woman in construction? No, not necessarily. It might help. Or better still, it might be, okay, well, let's bring a couple of the women that we've hired into this situation. And let's say, okay, I'm going to talk to you about the organization. They're going to talk to you about their experience. And let them testify, if you will. Give a little, I was a little skeptical when I started working here. And of course, there were the concerns about the male-female thing, and there were concerns about whether or not I would fit in. But the reality is I had fun. Did I have to work? Did I have to stretch? Yeah, absolutely. Because, you're walking into a male-dominated situation. Let's put our cards on the table. But the reality is that there's no reason why I can't do it. I make a healthy living here doing this type of thing. And frankly, in some cases, I'm bringing something to the table that the guy is not, because the woman business owner who's hiring me to automate a building, for instance, would rather talk to a woman than she might want to talk to a guy, just because there's that natural affinity. So it's nuances like that you can really promote.
Right. And the other point you made that I think is really important in the construction industry is that you need to give people kind of operationalize for them what you're really going to be doing in the field, like what equipment you're going to be working on, because there are so few avenues for people to learn about that if they don't have a relative who's in the trades or a friend who's in the trades, because we don't teach that in high school anymore. And a lot of people don't even know. They've heard of a plumber and they kind of know what a plumber does, but they have no idea what a steam fitter is. Really don't know what an HVAC service technician or a sheet metal worker or some of what they do. And so having tools there, so people can, get their hands on it and just get a sense, or even, some of the coolest booths I've seen, they've got like the virtual reality stuff, where you can do some virtual welding and things like that. So things like that, I think really differentiate you.
I will tell you a story from several years ago. I was at a fair here in the Denver area. And the local pipe fitters union had a booth, and it wasn't really a booth. It was an outdoor type of thing. But what they had done was they had brought their torches, and they had brought some pipe, and they had brought all of the equipment. And they said, who wants to sweat a pipe? That's all they said was, who wants to sweat a pipe? And they had a big sign. Well, you had everybody coming in to say, and of course you had the dads who were saying, oh, well, I'll let me show my son how I can. Well, it didn't go so well. But of course, you've got a pipe fitter there watching him and saying, well, let me give you a little instruction. You've got the middle school kid who is saying, wow, a torch. How cool is this? It's those types of things. And they had a waiting line of people. And I was just fascinated with the fact that you don't need an education in psychology to figure that stuff out. You just use your smarts to say, what are these kids going to like? Well, they're going to like to use a torch. Okay, well, let's put on our gloves and let's put on our goggles and let's sweat something. And then they give them away. Two little pieces of, and it probably cost them a couple $100 in supplies. And then you say, hey, if you're interested, you're planting seeds. If you're older, you say, hey, are you interested? Give me your email address and I'll send you some stuff.
That's amazing. And another example, here in Oregon, the Oregon tradeswomen, they have a career fair where they bring in students from grade schools, high schools, and let them build stuff. So I took my son when he was 5 years old, because that's the last time they were able to do it in person. It's been a couple years because of the pandemic. But he's hooked now, right? Like, he got to build a birdhouse because the carpenters were there. He got to do some welding because the UA was there. He got to do a little bit of electrical work as well, age appropriate stuff. But and he did some soldering. It was amazing, and there's no real way he would have had that opportunity in any other forum. And I think that was it's such an impactful way to reach people and really make them aware of the kind of work you would be doing and how cool it is. So I think that's great advice.
We made a mistake a long time ago by focusing. I started out, inside knowledge. I started out as an industrial arts teacher. I used to teach metal shop, grafting, all of those types of things, and it always dismayed me when all the shops became computer labs. And they kicked all the trades out of the high schools and put them in that special place over there, in that special high school, which kind of created an astigmatism or stigmatized them. And now that's starting to come back. Why? Well, partially because of the shortage of them and frankly, the rate that we're paying some of these tradespeople because there's not enough of them and a whole variety of other factors. And the fact in some cases, the kids are saying, well, I can get a trade and come out debt free and be making $80,000 after 4, 5, 6 years versus being $30,000 in debt when I graduate from college and then look for a $40,000 a year job. Well, it doesn't take too much smarts to figure that one out.
Yeah, exactly. And those are some of the same things I've observed over the years, that we've done such a disservice to the last couple of generations of people by not educating them that there is a pathway other than college to be a successful person. And we've taken the industrial arts classes out of the high schools. And so, I've kind of made it my mission to educate the wider world. Hey, this is a pathway for you. It's a family sustaining career where you don't have to go into debt and you can get paid to learn. You earn while you learn, and you come out making 6 figures in many cases as a journey person. So yeah, I couldn't agree more with your observations on that. Something else in terms of kind of operationalizing what an employer does to help them recruit the best and the brightest that you recommend is making day in the life videos to boost interest among potential job candidates. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. A day in the life video is essentially a short video, probably less than 10 minutes, which chronicles how a person works. They are typically informal. This, to some degree, was pioneered by the large accounting firms because they wanted to communicate with graduating accounting students. What's it going to be like to work as an auditor when you graduate from college and go to work for the Big Four or the Big Eight at that time? And so you literally, in some cases, you have somebody saying, hey, here's my apartment. And I come and get up and I have breakfast. And then I go down, I get my car and I drive 30 miles to the audit engagement. And this is what I do during the day. And they chronicle it. And then at the end of the day, I have a conference call with my team, and then I go home and I have a nice dinner, and that's the end of the video. But the average person, the average young person, does not have a lot of knowledge of what's going on there. And these are, especially now, that used to be something that somebody else had to record, if you will. Now you can do that with a selfie stick and an iPhone. And so you can say to somebody, would you please create one of these, stick it on iMovie or some other editing software, and submit it. And in fact, get a whole bunch of people to submit them and then choose the best ones, give everybody a prize, and post them on YouTube. And now you can go to a lot of companies and just do one of two things. Either go to YouTube and type in career videos, and you will see a whole wide selection of approaches. Or in some cases, for instance, with Best Buy, you can go to bestbuy.com/careers, and you'll see a whole bunch of, this is what it's like to be in technical sales. This is what it's like to be a manager. This is what it's like to be in purchasing. And as a result of that, it gives a person an opportunity who is uninitiated, especially with an unfamiliar thing such as the trades, what it's really like. Because, let's be honest, there's an awful lot of people out there who still figure, okay, well, if you're going to be working mechanical contracting, you're going to work in overalls and get your hands dirty every day. And most of the contractors I know are, that's just not the way they work these days. Yes, there are pipe fitters and so on who get their hands dirty, but the rest of the trades, it's about pushing buttons on a computer in a lot of cases for automation or for refrigeration and calculating things. And it's very different than it used to be, and a lot of people are misinformed. So we need to inform them by that type of approach.
I love that. Yeah. I mean, using technology, the technology of iPhones and smartphones and YouTube to reach a wider audience, but also to share the technological advances that have been made in the industry that a lot of people aren't aware of. That's a really good point. I mean, because CAD is a thing that people don't know about outside this industry. Just all the cool stuff that's happening with Trimble and things like that. People aren't aware of that. So I think that's a fabulous suggestion, is to just have people who are really doing the work share what they're doing so more people know about it. That's great. So, sort of moving from the recruitment process into the employee selection process, you stress the importance of being really intentional in your employee selection procedures. And I'm wondering if you can share some of your best practices for employers on how to select the best candidates once they've pulled in them through recruiting.
Okay, well, several things. Number one, keep people in motion. The average, as I mentioned at the beginning, the average applicant comes in with a picture in their head of what's going to happen. And that typically is, I'm going to sit down across the table from whoever the person is interviewing me, and they're going to ask me questions that I've probably figured out in advance and have answers for. And then after 45 minutes or whatever, we're going to get up and shake hands and say, thank you very much for coming in. We'll let you know. But what happens if we switch that up and the interviewer meets the person at the door and says, let me give you a tour of the facility? Well, as I jokingly say in presentations, people can't walk and lie at the same time. So all those rehearsed answers go right out the window, because you've got to pay attention to where you are. You're being introduced to strangers, perhaps. You've got to watch out so you don't trip over equipment. And so the interviewer can still ask those questions, but they get a much more candid answer because the person is having to think and walk and observe at the same time. If you can keep, applicants off balance, you're going to get a much better picture of what they're going to be like on the job 8 hours a day, because that's what we're trying to observe, not how they perform in an interview. Some people interview very well, other people don't. Some of those who interview very well don't turn out to be very good employees, and vice versa. So we want to watch them in action. You can bring them up to a piece of equipment, as I was mentioning before, and just, in this particular case, what do you think of this? Have you used one of these before? You play with it. Or you might say to somebody, we've been tossing this problem that we have right now around. What do you think? And you're not interested in whether or not they come up with the correct answer. You're interested in seeing how their mind thinks, how they approach it, and so on. I'm forever saying, I don't care what an applicant knows. I want to know how an applicant thinks. I'm going to have to teach them what they need to know. Even if they're trained and they have their degree or they have their formal training, I'm still going to have to teach them how to fit in, how to work in our environment. But the only way I do that is to observe the approach they have. What do they do for problem solving? Are they good critical thinkers? Are they flexible when things don't go the way they expect? Are they resilient? What's their energy? Do they keep up with you? I've had people say, he didn't keep up with me in the interview. We're walking through the facility and he kind of just got lost. And he was always 3 steps behind me. Well, if he's always going to be 3 steps behind in the interview, maybe he's going to be always 3 steps behind while he's working. Do you want that type of situation on the job? So it's observation. It's not words. And you can make it very practical. I had one of the stories I've told endlessly is a Hampton Inn manager who interviews all his candidates over a barrel of towels. And I said, why? And he said, because you can observe things, that you teach them how to, you ask them questions. Can they fold towels and talk at the same time? Can they fold towels? Which, that's hand-eye coordination. He said, I actually had one person who came in and kind of said, well, you're not paying me yet. So, and he said that interview ended very quickly. So he said, you'd be shocked sometimes at what people will do or won't do, but you want to watch the energy. You want to see what they do to problem solve. And that's one of the things to do. So that's interviewing by walking around. It's giving people assignments and saying, what can you do? I'm going to give you 45 minutes to do this. Or if you're going to interview a group of people, have them work on a project together. And when you have them work on the project, you get to see who the natural leaders are, who the problem solvers are, who the impatient people are, who the followers are, who's the person with the sharp pencil who's keeping track of everything, who's the rah-rah person that keeps everybody motivated. And you get a feel and then say, okay, well, we can, this is a good person for this situation, that's a good person for that situation, and so on and so forth. You don't get that if you put that same group in a room and just simply interview them all. It's just not the same thing.
Yeah. I mean, I've often observed that you don't really get to know somebody as a person unless you've played a game with them, like a board game or a card game or golf, right? Because that will really tell you how honest a person is, like how prone they are to cheat, whether they're a good loser, whether they're a good winner, those types of things. So I couldn't agree more that putting people in sort of non-traditional interview situations is a good way to learn more about their personality than you might in a situation where they've had more opportunities to rehearse. So I'm wondering though, if you're hiring somebody for an office position where, walking isn't necessarily a major part of the job, and you have a candidate who's disabled in a way that makes walking difficult for them, are there other ways that you can get some of that information?
Well, once again, it's problem solving. As I say, I'm more interested in how a person approaches problems and challenges, which means you get them into conversations. But it can't be hypothetical. Too many times you ask a person, what about this situation? And they say, well, if I was in that situation, this is what I would do. But we all know that telling a person what you would do and actually doing it, and all the emotion and problem solving and unexpected consequences and everything that comes with it are two very, very different things. So you might create, for instance, what has traditionally been called an assessment center. So if I've got somebody who is going to be working in an office situation, I might put together an in-basket exercise and say, I'm going to give you a couple of hours and I want to see how they organize the paperwork, how they organize the calls that come in unexpectedly. I might give them, if they're in a customer support situation, I might give them a script or even send that script out, a day or two ahead of time and say, this is how these are 10 or 12 or 15 questions we typically get in a customer support situation. And these are the typical answers that we give. We don't expect you to memorize these answers, but we expect that these are the typical responses that would be provided. And then you give them an in-basket exercise and you have people literally call them randomly and just complain and play customer. And you watch and see. And you have the person who just needs to be led by the nose as a customer because they just don't they don't know what they're asking, and you've got to figure it out. You've got the angry person who calls and chews them out before they get a chance to really tell you what the problem is, and everything in between. And you see how a person responds to that type of thing. So, it doesn't have anything to do with the physical ability. It has to do with whether or not the person in an office situation, for instance, can deal with that.
So then once you've observed all that, moving into making the hiring decision itself, what are some recommendations you have for things that employers should be looking for and thinking about when they're getting down to selecting the candidate?
It's important to have a set of criteria, what this is, or characteristics. This is what we're looking for. You can have as many as, for instance, 10. But you have to understand and accept the fact that you're never going to get the top 3 in any situation. You're going to be doing good if you get the top 2, which means that you have to be prepared to train a person up. You might say, well, this person meets 3 out of 5, or this person meets 4 out of 5. Isn't that phenomenal? We're never going to get somebody who is totally a match. But, even in a situation where we have a very tight job market and there is that temptation to just hire any warm body to fill a slot, you may be inclined to hire someone who's not a good match, but at least you know on the way in the door where the deficits are, where the strengths are, where you're going to have to help the person get there quickly. Because too often employers hire someone and then discover, 6, 8, 10 weeks down the road that there's a good example of that, for instance, might be basic skills. This person graduated from college. They must know how to write. No, not necessarily. And so that's, I'm forever saying, basic skills, have somebody, in your presence. I don't want you to submit something that comes from outside, because it could be his wife or sister-in-law that's submitting it. We want to watch it in action. We want to see how the person puts together a report. We want to see how a person makes an argument and so on. But all of that said, you want to be able to sit there and say, this is where the match is. And it's a 60% match. It's an 80% match. Okay. In a tight market, maybe you'll take a 60% match, knowing that you're going to have to do some training. In a market that's more employer favored, you might be a little bit more choosy in terms of who you're looking for, but I don't see that happening in the next 2, 3, 4 years. We're going to be in a tight market for a while. And finally, one of the things I say to people is write down why you chose them. Record it. Because you're going to have misgivings about anybody you hire. And you're going to have that 6, 8, 10 weeks into the process, or you're going to have somebody who you hired and somebody else is supervising them. They're unhappy. If you can go back and refer to your notes and say, this is why we hired this person. These were our concerns. These were our strengths. This is what we know we needed to do. Then we can reassure ourselves that we made a good choice.
Once you've hired someone and it turns out they're a great employee and you want to hang on to them, what can you do to hang on to your best people?
Well, the first part is you have to be present. I am forever saying to employers, you can't sit in your office and just assume everything's going well. I was conducting a program on Tuesday, and it was an automation group. But one of the things I was saying to them is, these are all owners. Go out to the field, take 1 day a month, and just go visit the sites. And just go talk to people. Don't go in there. If the need is appropriate, pitch in. For heaven's sakes, help them. But it's more a matter of just showing up and spending an hour or two, because your presence makes a difference. They can reach out and touch the boss. You can say to them what needs to change. If you get an inkling that you've got a supervisor who's not as strong as you would like to be, or is doing something that people are unsettled by, it's a perfect opportunity when the boss is around the corner to say, how you like it here. You don't have to say, hey, I heard something about the boss not doing his job. Tell me. You're not doing that. What you're doing is you're just gathering intelligence. At the right time, at the right situation, somebody will say that, and they appreciate that presence. They recognize that they're part of the culture. They're being a contributor, and that contribution is appreciated. So that's one very, very important thing. For young people especially, professional development, opportunities to network, opportunities to get more training. Young people have learned to be resume builders. The more training they have, the more certifications they have, the more experiences, the more contacts they have, the more versatile they become, not if, but when they start looking for another opportunity. And so they build resumes on that basis. And you can't stop them from doing that. If you do, they'll leave anyway. So what you don't want to do is you want to encourage that, but you also want to stay on top of it and help and just make sure you understand that if they're suddenly asking for this, that, and the other, and it's not necessarily related to the job, you have to wonder why. Maybe they're trying to get training on your time to go someplace else to work for somebody else. So you want to investigate that. And the professional development can be mentoring. It can be coaching. It can be something more official where you send them to a class or a certification program. It might be some sort of team support group where they get together with their peers and you pay for it and everybody goes out to lunch, once a quarter and says, what are the takeaways? Maybe it's facilitated. Maybe it's not. So professional development is an important part of that. Compensation obviously plays a role because we are so aware these days. You can Google, compensation surveys till you're blue in the face and then go to your boss and say, well, I'm not being paid what I'm worth. Well, it's a lot more complicated than that. A lot of people look at it and say, well, the average person makes this and I'm making that, therefore I should get a $7,000 raise. Yeah, but are we taking into consideration the cost of professional development that other job isn't getting? Are we taking into consideration the fact that you get a better type of health benefits than that person? How about the vacation? And the employer has to be able to balance that. But even all of that said, young people will leave, they won't leave over the money as much as they will leave over the working conditions or over a better opportunity, or in some cases, a philosophical disagreement. CSR has forever been customer service representative. Now it's called corporate social responsibility. In other words, why aren't you out in the community supporting climate change? Why aren't you out in the community supporting women's rights? Why aren't you out in the community? And that sometimes it places employers in difficult situations because there's not a real clear understanding among a lot of young people about the larger picture, if you will, and that creates part of the problem. So the employer's got to take the initiative to say, this is what we're doing to support the community. We can't support all of the community, but these are the causes, or these are the things that we support. And you're occasionally going to lose somebody who says, well, I just don't like the way your philosophy. Okay, well, we're sorry to see you leave, but we can't change the entire organization just simply because you think we should do more for climate change. Well, okay, sorry, but there's got to be a give and take.
Yeah, absolutely. And, that give and take, it's so important in terms of one of the things you brought up, which is getting to know your employees as people and keeping an eye and finding out what experiences they're having on the job site or out in the field. Because I've heard over and over again from both sides of a situation that things are happening out on job sites in the field that people in the office have no idea are happening. And, too often it escalates into a situation that if the employer had just been aware that this kind of talk is happening in the field, or this person who's a great employee is having this experience that I had no idea was happening, they could have addressed the situation a lot earlier and spared themselves losing an amazing employee in an even more negative situation. They could have prevented an instance of harassment or discrimination from occurring in the first place or escalating. So I think that point you made about just showing up every once in a while, just to kind of find out how things are going and talking to your people, it's so important.
Yeah. One toxic person can cause a tremendous amount of trouble. And if you don't know that person is toxic and people are reluctant to talk and so on, even one toxic customer, there are customers out there that drive us nuts. And if you aren't aware that the customer's giving whoever's who's ever on the site a hard time. And they don't necessarily want to say something. So there's any endless variations of that. The only way to find out is to be out there and to talk to people and gather intelligence.
Yeah, exactly. And it's so important because your people are your biggest investment. I mean, payroll is usually the biggest line item. And whatever you can be doing to avoid losing good people, you need to be doing it if you want to manage those costs and really hang on to the best, most productive people.
I was going to mention one of the things that I tell employers are that there are actual signs of leaving behavior. There are things that, and again, it comes through observation, not words. But there are things that people do that tend you to make you start believing or wondering whether or not they are on their way out the door, looking for another job, and so on. Things like the individual who just is always in very casual clothes because that's the culture, all of a sudden shows up in a dress shirt and a nice pair of khakis one day, and you wonder. Or the individual who makes sort of fatalistic comments about, well, after I leave, you guys will be stuck with this problem. Or the individual who is around the corner, we all have our smartphones, but this guy's outside around the corner in his car for 25 minutes talking on the phone, and you have to wonder what's going on, especially if it happens several times. Or the person who's always on time and always never misses a day suddenly misses 3 days in a month, or comes in late unexpectedly. There's a whole variety of I've identified about 12 or 14 of them. And they're little observational types of things. And the solution, very frankly, is to ask. As much as you don't want to create an awkward situation, it could be that the individual on the phone is dealing with a marital issue and just doesn't want to share, or perhaps a family crisis of some sort. Or somebody is on their way to a court date, and they dressed up in khakis because they were trying to get out of the speeding ticket. It could be very, very legitimate type of stuff, but unless you ask and say, this is not you. You're suddenly being very argumentative, and you've always been such a mild-mannered, get-along kind of person. What's going on? And they might say, there's nothing going on. I'm just in a bad mood, and I have been for the past 2 weeks because of A, B, C, or D. On the other hand, they may come clean and say, well, as a matter of fact, these other guys over here have offered me something, and I went in for an interview today, and at least that gives you the opening to say, well, let's talk about that. Not necessarily what can we do to keep you, but let's have a conversation and see where that conversation goes. And if you want that person to stay, and we don't always want that person to stay, frankly, but most of the time we do. What can we do to keep you on board? Because turnover is a huge cost in most organizations. And you don't want that person taking advantage of you, but by the same token, you don't want to lose them either. So you've got to be comfortable with that sort of awkward conversation.
Absolutely. Awkward conversations, they sometimes have to happen if you want to prevent losing somebody or having a situation escalate into something that could have easily been prevented with a little bit of proactive communication. So I think that's great advice. So this might be a good time to transition into our next topic, which is burnout, because I think a lot of the behaviors that you just described as examples of leaving behavior are tied directly to burnout.